Hello, everyone. This is Noel Balacek at the Center for Regional Food Systems. It's about 1 o'clock, and it looks like we got about 20 participants on, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing I wanted to say is this is being recorded, so if you or one of your colleagues would like to revisit this presentation at a later time, we will have it up on the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems website in probably a week or two, so you can go there to find a recording of this webinar. Megan, if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. So, MSU is an equal opportunity equal opportunity employer and affirmative action organization, a Center for Regional Food Systems as well. If you'd like to learn more about Center for Regional Food Systems racial equity activity, you can visit our website as well. You can go ahead and advance again, Megan. The webinar today is co-organized and sponsored by the Michigan Good Food Fund, which is a public-private partnership loan fund that provides financing and business assistance to good food enterprises that benefit underserved communities across Michigan. This webinar is an example of the sort of business assistance through the Michigan Good Food Fund. Again, you can learn a bit more about the Good Food Fund by visiting the webpage at the bottom of your screen there, michigangoodfoodfund.org. You can go ahead and advance again, Megan. The other partner in organizing this webinar is the Michigan Food Hub Network, which is led by the Center for Regional Food Systems in collaboration with Morse Marketing Connections. The Michigan Food Hub Network facilitates increased learning, innovation, profitability for food hubs, increase access to food hub financial and technical assistance, research, and education, and increase business-to-business collaboration across food hubs. We have 3 statewide Michigan Food Hub Network meetings per year, which move around the state. The next one will be July 14th in Kalamazoo, and we encourage you to attend that meeting. And if you would like to learn more about the Michigan Food Hub Network or join our listserv, you can again find that on the MSU CRFS website, which is foodsystems.msu.edu, and learn more about our activities there. So with that, we can get into the webinar. I'm going to introduce Megan here, but before we get started, I did just want to say you're welcome to use the chat pod to enter any questions or comments. You can use the Q&A pod as well. Either works just fine. We are happy to take questions throughout the webinar, but there will be sort of a designated Q&A time at the end. Also, if you're having issues with audio or video, just enter your comments there in the chat pod, and I'll try to follow up with you to make sure that we get those issues resolved. So with that, I am very happy to introduce Megan Masson-Minock. Megan is the principal at E&P and Associates in Ann Arbor. She has 15 years experience as an urban planning consultant and has specialized in food systems since about 2008. Megan is also a contributor to the Michigan Association of Planning's Food System Policy. And she has also been an advisor and a facilitator for the Michigan Food Hub Network. She is also the co-facilitator of the Michigan Local Food Council Network. So we're really happy to have Megan here today to share some of her expertise on planning and how it can be used as a sort of innovative tool to support local food enterprise, in particular things like food processing and food distribution. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan. You can take it from here. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Noel. One of the things we wanted to do first was to figure out who was on the phone with us so that we can go forward, so I can better tailor what we're talking about. So Noel's going to pop up a short poll here for everybody to take, and we basically want to know who's listening in, whether you're a food processor, a food retailer, a municipal planner, a planning consultant, or some other category. So if we could just take a moment. Is that poll popping up, Noel?
Yeah, it looks good. Folks are filling it out. Maybe give it 30 seconds here, just and then I will share the results.
Okay.
Okay, so I see a lot of others in there. Perhaps if you are an other, maybe you can just hop on the chat pod and tell us what that other might be. But it does look like we have some planners and a few food folks, so it's good. We got a good mix.
Okay.
Can you see that those results there, Megan, on your screen?
Actually, no. So I'm going to pause share. Oh, I see it now.
That's
great.
Mm-hmm. And it does look like, so I see extension educator, local health department. So it's good. I think we will have a good crowd here.
Okay, so let's resume. And then next. So our outline for today is first part going to go over what is zoning. For some folks, this may be a review, so bear with us. Then we're going to go over some innovative zoning techniques that people throughout Michigan have used in order to encourage more food-based businesses in their municipalities, and also some hints on what to do when zoning is not working, because often zoning ordinances have not been updated for a long time. They may have been built for a community 20 years ago, and so sometimes there needs to be some tinkering, or there's different processes that you can be aware of or you can use in order to help food-based businesses or other businesses in a community. So what is zoning? It is the legal basis for all land use regulation in a municipality. And so it comes directly out of a municipality's police powers to protect public health, safety, and welfare of its residents. That comes directly from the U.S. Constitution. And that power, therefore, it has to be reasonably related to public welfare. There's some legal framework that sets up zoning in Michigan. There's the Michigan Planning Act, the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, and there's also case law from U.S. Supreme Court cases, Michigan Supreme Court, and local lawsuits. So really, not only, sometimes I describe zoning ordinances as spider webs, but there's a spider webs of legal framework that enable this spider web. Where did really zoning come from? It started in the 1920s here in the United States, where cities were looking to control proximity of uses or locations of uses. And the first Supreme Court case was Euclid versus Ambler in Ohio, and that's where the word Euclidean on this slide comes from. And that again was to separate land uses. That was a factory next to an apartment building, but because of that need to control abuses of uncontrolled private development, what zoning in a traditional manner has done is really separated uses and then kind of stretched these uses out. So then it's resulted in inability to walk to a grocery store, and we need to drive almost everywhere. And it's also divided cities into districts with regulations within each district. And there's some examples of that as we go on. But all zoning ordinances start with planning. So every community in the state of Michigan must have a master plan, and they are supposed to update it once every 5 years. Some do, some don't. But if you're really interested in food and food systems in your municipality, go to their master plan first, then go to the zoning ordinance. Community engagement is supposed to be foundational to that local planning. So if you hear of a meeting, show up, or a poll on a website or whatnot. And that master plan is supposed to set the vision for a community and its plans for the future. It must have goals and objectives, and a clear thing for you to see is if a master plan deals with food at all is, do those goals or objectives mention food or food-based businesses or food systems in any way? And are they implemented? And then these things can be implemented through zoning and other regulatory or programmatic efforts. In terms of how to plan for food, one of the things is that you have your food-based businesses, experts, and stakeholders involved during the development of the master plan. And that may be a constituency that some municipal planners are not used to reaching out to. And also those stakeholders in the food world can be very varied, from who we have on the line to health departments, for those people looking for food access, those who work for extension educators, and those who own or run a business that specifically either produces or grows a food product. Also, one of the things to do with master planning is to look at that existing land use analysis and see the vacant parcels, soils, buildings, are they suitable for food-based businesses or food access opportunities? Also, there's another thing that you do in a master plan where you look at an environmental scan. You look at gaps. So what's missing in the community? And a lot of times the gaps are about transportation or about whether you have enough infrastructure. But you can also have that environmental scan look at the gaps for small, medium, and large scale businesses in all parts of the local food system. After a municipality has done a master plan or updated a master plan, what comes next is a zoning ordinance. And that ordinance is the local law on where and what can happen on a piece of land. Usually zoning maps look something like this. This is Hudson Township in Lenawee County. It's a very rural place, and only certain uses in certain places can happen in certain places. For instance, the big white spot, all the white, that's agricultural. So that's zoned either for agricultural farm operations or large lot housing. And then the buildings can only happen in certain ways. There's also general regulation that happens in a zoning ordinance too that applies to any district. And those usually deal with environmental protection. In something like a rural township like Hudson, it would be wetland protection, tree protection, things like that, but also signs, which you have in urban, rural, and suburban communities, and also regulations on things like noise, odor, and dust. But the purpose of a zoning ordinance, the overall purpose, is to really make sure that everyone is being a good neighbor and to make sure no one is a nuisance or a danger to the health of anyone else. So that's the base, that's at the base of what these laws should be about. There are two types of zoning at this point in time. There's use-based or Euclidean zoning, as I mentioned before. And so Hudson Township has a use-based zoning district. And what that means is that all the lot and building regulations are the same in each district. So if you look at the yellow, which is down below the village of Hudson, that's residential, and every building, every house in those yellow areas on the map has to follow the regulations that are shown in the diagram on the left. So it doesn't matter how many stories the houses have, where the garage is, where the front, where it faces, how big the house is, they all have to abide by the same rules. And a lot of times that works in rural and suburban areas. But what we found in urban areas is form-based zoning has been a better fit because of just the variety of buildings that have grown up over time in urban areas. So this is an example from City of Ypsilanti. They adopted about a year and a half ago a new zoning ordinance that has form-based districts. And what those say is that basically there are several different types of houses and several different sizes of lots in different neighborhoods, specifically in this case, all the neighborhoods that are in brown. And so we have different regulations for those different types of buildings or houses. So any one of these three different types of buildings, whether it be a large historic home, which is a mansion, somewhat large, a large home, but maybe not quite as big as an estate or a house, those have different regulations about how big they can be, where they can be on the lot, and the sizes of the lots. Now, as you can see in all those maps, there were a whole mess of different colors. So the planners are going to have to, they all know this. And so this is really education for anybody who's new to zoning and is looking to look at a map and say, what the heck do all these colors mean? And there is a color code. So I'm going to run through that real quickly. Gray or purple usually means industrial. And so I put up pictures to kind of show you a food-based business that would be thought of as immediately in those districts. So somebody like a major food processor like Jiffy would be in a gray district. Usually that's heavy industrial, but something that just does distribution and warehousing, that would usually be in something called light industrial, which is purple. Also, there's commercial. Basically, kind of the lighter the color, the less intense, the darker the color, the more intense. And so in commercial, you'll see that there will be different levels of usually grocery stores, which is on the lighter red, but then in downtown areas where usually there is a mixture of uses, but things are very crowded in terms of buildings right beside each other, you might find something like a farmer's market. Office, again, is usually blue. The smaller the office, the lighter the color. And sometimes also the dark blue might also have a tech piece to it as well in terms of research or development. So if you were looking to do food dyes or something like that, those tech zones also for research and development might work. Residential, because there's the cottage food law here, and there are some areas do allow urban gardening or urban agriculture in residential districts, but basically the lighter the yellow, the less density or the larger the lot. And then also if you can get, this goes usually from yellow to orange, and if it's deep orange, those are really usually large several story apartment buildings. And then, of course, agriculture. And usually on maps, those are shown either in white or green. Green could also stand for parks or natural features or an area where they want to have large lots or cluster development in order to protect natural features. So that's a shorthand. Not every map is going to abide by that, but for those of you who are new to zoning, it's a good first crib sheet in order to go forward. One of the things about zoning, though, is mostly that it's built for big food. It's built for the long trip. And so a lot of times our regulations assume that every business is big, but new and growing businesses have a difficult time finding affordable space, whether it's being an apprentice farmer who's moving up and their family wants to purchase a farm, or it's somebody going from cottage food to an incubator kitchen. And so what this slide shows is that there are really all these different scales of production, processing, and distribution that can happen. And the frames show what zones they might usually fit in. So on the top, working on production, working left to right, you have a large farm, commodity crop. Then there's a medium. In the medium, what we show is an urban farm in the city of Flint that took up several blocks. But then you have a small backyard farm, a small backyard garden in the city of Ann Arbor. And so all of our regulations need to be able to deal with these. Same thing for processing. Again, we usually do a good job about designating places and the appropriate regulations for a large processor, but a medium scale processor like the kitchen incubator that's shown in the middle, sometimes there's not a lot of space for them, or if you only have space in a large industrial district, that property has a certain value and can be very difficult, can be too expensive for something like an incubator kitchen or a growing kitchen, a growing food-based business to rent. Also on the small scale, in somebody's home, people can, and also people do produce things for cottage food law to sell at farmers markets. Also in terms of distribution, again, your zoning probably will think of distribution as the large warehouse that's shown in the lower left-hand corner, or it does a good job about commercial distribution through its traditional farmers market. But the small scale, which is shown on the lower right-hand corner, with the sharing of boxes through a distribution for a community-supported agriculture, that it was actually where that picture was taken. It was in a commercial district, but it really could occur anywhere throughout communities. I've seen CSAs where people have picked them up, and lots of people pick them up in garages, a residential home, of a farmer's market, etc. So as planners and as officials look at a food system as a central part of their city or their municipality or their community, really one of the things I wanted to urge was that we look at the large, the medium, and the small scale and make sure that zoning deals with all of those uses and has rules where appropriate. So,
Megan, I was just going to interrupt really quickly. There was a question in the chat pod that relates back to sort of what you were talking about, agricultural production. And the question is whether there was an effort in the 20s to eliminate agriculture from residential zones or separate the two, and whether the rationale was sort of a health and safety rationale. Or wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about sort of why agriculture is typically excluded from residential zones.
I do not know the history of that in terms of the 1920s. I think so I do know that in the 1970s and 80s, what happened was that our community started to go further and further out into the countryside, and again, with a large scale farming, it is not necessarily at times the greatest neighbor for residential living, especially single family residential. So a lot of the laws that we have now, which are right to farm in Michigan, right to farm, what they are attempting to deal with was that conflict in the 1970s and 80s with large agricultural production, new housing development coming in, and people basically being very upset that they spent this amount of money on a beautiful home in the countryside, but didn't know or anticipate about the odor and dust and different things that happen on a farm because they had never lived near one before. And it got to such a point where there were big conflicts between townships and residents and lawsuits that kept going on and on and on. And that was where Right to Farm came from.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like sort of an inverse of what's going on with urban livestock right now in some cities and things like that. But that's a really interesting bit of insight there. So great. Thank you.
Yeah. And I saw the list of folks who are on the call, and some of them might know that history better than I do. And I would encourage them to share resources in the chat pod. Were there any other questions we should look at right now? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to talk about a couple of innovative zoning techniques that have been used in communities in Michigan. Again, I want to emphasize that the zoning starts with planning. So if this is something that you as a planner in your community are interested in, when you get to your master plan, absolutely do the planning. I give a couple of examples, but like Marquette County has a master plan where food is a system, and they rank it right up there with transportation. And then also, this is an example from the Lakes to Land Regional Initiative, where 9 community master plans have agriculture and local food as a central role. And that was the winner of a Michigan Association of Planning Award this past year. So off my soapbox in terms of planning, when you're going to the zoning, where do you start? And again, look at your zoning ordinance and say, does it allow for all parts of the food system, production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management at small, medium, and large operations. If yes, absolutely, please share with all of us and how you do it, and also how you got it through in terms of passage. If no, I'm going to give you a couple of ideas. And again, I know that there are some great minds on the line who would also have things to share as we go forward. One of the things you can do is, if you're in a primary agricultural community, but you're looking to have more food-based businesses come in, is to allow a commercial kitchen space in an agricultural zone. Ann Arbor Township did this, and that was in response to a request from the Washtenaw Food Hub. What you see is an aerial shot of the Washtenaw Food Hub, and what it was an old fertilizer depot. So that's the reason why you have so many buildings on an agriculturally zoned lot, which doesn't often happen. The group got it at auction, at a tax auction, and then wanted to have processing, but also we're looking to have a farm, to have food distribution as well. So what the township did was they looked at it and said, well, if you can do it in 2,500 square feet or less, then what it is of processing and structures in 5,000 square feet or less of agricultural food storage, you can just get a building permit and go. If they had asked to do something else, which a building permit can take a week to a month, depending on how, in terms of the township turning it around. And so, but if they had to go for a full site plan, it would have been literally thousands of dollars for the food hub in terms of hiring architects and engineers to do plans. But also then it was a lot of, it would have been probably about 6 months of review by public bodies, which they really weren't in a place to take that risk at that point. So what Ann Arbor Township did was they amended their zone and they amended their agricultural district. So now anywhere in Ann Arbor Township, if you have a farm operation, you can have, and as an accessory use, 2,500 square feet or less of agricultural processing on site, or 5,000 square feet or less of agricultural food storage, and also 5,000 square feet or less of commercial kitchen. And again, that was reusing the existing buildings. And then they had a farm market or farm stand, and they had a limitation on that. And there's also a limitation on what could be sold at the farm market and farm stand that's related to the Michigan Right to Farm Act's generally accepted agricultural management practices. So, and a lot of times rural townships feel like, there's not a lot of things we can do. There are a couple things that you can do, and this is one of them. Also, for a more suburban or urban community, is to look at food processing outside of industrial. So again, this is City of Ypsilanti, and they did this in 2013, and they wanted to open up a bunch of different food businesses, because what they had is they had a lot of people who were doing cottage-based, selling at the farmers market, and then they actually, then they needed to get into a commercial space. They needed to get into a bigger space in order to kind of move their business to the next level. But they were in the City of Ypsilanti is a pretty small city, and there was only so much industrial property, and that industrial property was prime, or it was, it was too expensive for them, or it was way too big in terms of the amount that was available to rent. So what the city did is they made it a special land use, and a special land use is in Michigan law, it's enabled in the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act that there are two types of uses: a principal use, which is allowed no matter what, and that's an administrative approval. If it meets it, it should be approved. And then there's a special land use. They're also known as conditional land uses. And then that requires a public hearing and a higher level of scrutiny. Some places have that as an administrative body that meets. Some, it's the planning commission that is the final the final approving body. Some it's actually the township board or the city council. The Zoning Enabling Act gives the municipality, all they have to do is set a process, but they have to have a public hearing and notify people within 300 feet. So they said in business districts like the downtown shown on top, or this strip that's shown, the retail strip that's shown in the middle, there could be caterers, there can be manufacturing of food products. There were some limitations on that, no meat processing, etc. But there could be brewing and distilling. And again, those were special land use. And then what they did is they updated their list of uses in their manufacturing or industrial districts to allow caterers specifically, all food manufacturing and brewing and distilling. And then what's happened in talking with the planners there is that over the course of the past couple of years, they've had a lot more caterers open up, especially on these the strips that are like the one in the middle. They're underutilized retail corridors where a lot of space sits empty, but then a caterer could come in and utilize, they only needed a small amount of space. And so the rent was right. And then it reactivated this place that used to just be zoned for retail, and there's just not as much retail anymore. If you're interested in doing it, here are some hints. You can set limits so the size and the scale of the business still fit with the district. And that's very important, especially in something like your historic downtown, where that brings in the most tourists, and that's really sometimes your economic engine. You can limit the size by square footage. You can also limit it by hours of operation. For instance, on these retail corridors, which back up to neighborhoods, throughout that whole district, it was said nobody could operate past 11 o'clock p.m. and nobody could open up before 6 a.m. So that protects those residential residents to the back. Also, you could link it to the volume of the product, and in their form-based rewrite, they added on these retail strips as a special land use micro distilleries, micro breweries, and micro vintners or winemakers, but they link that directly to that state regulations for those licenses, which license the volume of it. And that's one of the things to think about is when you're setting these limitations is how, if you have a code enforcement officer, how easy are you making his or her job? Because it's easy for them to see what the square footage is. It's easy for them to, if you authorize their overtime, to see if they're if they're operating at midnight. But it's not so easy for your code enforcement officer to go out and tally the volume of the product that's coming out of a facility. Again, also another hint is that these things might be more acceptable under under certain circumstances, and then you link them to be special uses. And you can list what those rules are in the zoning. And again, that provides this extra layer of scrutiny, and a public hearing is required.
Megan, just quickly, again, I have another question in the Q&A pod here. It says, can you clarify the way uses can be permitted in Lansing? We've been talking about having urban ag by right, by condition, allowed as long as it meets specific conditions, but no permit required, and by special use, the permit process is required.
Okay, yes. So by right is also what I would refer to as a permitted use or principal permitted use. That means you can do it, like just you go, you might need a building permit for something, or it might be that, like for instance, an urban garden where you're not putting any sticks in the ground, that would be by right. By condition means that it's a use by right, but there are certain rules that you have to follow. And so that's what by condition means. And those rules would be listed by that use in the zoning ordinance. So it might be for a hoop house that you're going to, the rules say the hoop house has to get a zoning permit, and it has to abide by the setbacks. That's how far a structure needs to be from property lines of the district that it's in. By special use means, again, what I've said here, that extra layer of scrutiny where a public hearing is required. And that everybody within 300 feet gets a notice in the mail, and then they have a public hearing where they come and state what their concerns or or sometimes their affirmations are. And then you go from there. So the easiest is by right in terms of if you're looking to have something happen. Kind of medium is by condition, and that's just that you can do it, but you have to abide by these certain rules. If you don't abide by these certain rules, we're not going to give you a permit, or we're going to give you a ticket later. And by special use is that you have to go through this longer process. It costs more money, and the public is notified and involved in the decision making.
Great. There's one other question here. Does anyone know if cottage food law allows home-based winemaking? You'd have to have an alcohol. I'm not sure about that. No.
I'm not sure about that either. But I don't. I know it was restricted to certain uses or certain processes, and I haven't seen a lot of homemade wine at the farmers market, but I have seen a lot of baked goods.
Yeah, that might be an issue more with the liquor control sort of regulations and less about food manufacturing law.
Yeah. The other thing about allowing those micro distilleries, breweries, and winemakers is that whether they have a tasting room or not, you as a municipality can restrict that, and then also where that is best. Maybe it's not great to have a tasting room in an industrial district right by somewhere where they're working with heavy steel, but it might be a great addition, someplace like a retail strip or downtown where you already allow bars or saloons or whatnot, or restaurants.
I see a couple other people chimed in here. It looks like the consensus is that no, wine is not allowed by cottage food law, and that cottage food law only allows certain products that are specified in the law.
Yeah.
And there's actually a link here in the Q&A pod if you want to, anybody's interested in following up on that. And then there's just one more quick one, and I don't want to stop your momentum here too much, but is it common practice for zoning ordinances to regulate non-permanent structures like hoop houses? Are these structures protected under the Right to Farm Act?
That is a great question about hoop houses. So, okay, I'm going to try and keep this short. There's the Building Act, which it's so there's a law that sets the building code for the entire state, and that is different from zoning. In the building code, it exempts any building that's specifically for agricultural purpose. So you would think that then any hoop house would fall under that. But in various different urban communities, it has been interpreted that if agriculture was not specifically allowed, then it can't be for an agricultural use. There is a law going through the state legislature right now, which would clarify this for hoop houses in the Building Act. I don't know the name of the law off the top of my head, but it would also clarify things. So especially for urban farmers and for building officials that have not had to deal with hoop houses before, it's a continued source of conflict. I've had these discussions with various people since mid 2000s, and even when we've had the building official talk to the state building agency and say it's exempt, a lot of times they feel that it's not, and then we'll ask for things like snow loads, frost heaves, wind loads that no person who ever designed a hoop house had ever thought that would be necessary. So that's kind of the short story on those. my hint for you in terms of dealing with building officials is it is their job to make sure that everybody who walks into every building in any municipality is safe. So if they think that thing is gonna fall on somebody's head and kill them or hurt them, if they think there's even a whiff of danger of that, they are going to lean towards not approving it. They are very conservative folk. I would, the best thing that you can do is to ask early and ask often and see what they need. And then also, if you're going to go in to ask a building official for something or anybody in a municipal office, don't expect things to go really rapidly quickly. It's just, they are not that type of organizations. And we get into that a little bit later.
Okay, great. Thanks, Megan. Sorry to slow you up, but I think it's good to tackle some of those as we go.
Yeah. So, okay. It's a good question. Unfortunately, there's not a short answer. Another thing you can do is in your zoning, update your food uses and regulations. And one of the things, I put the example of food carts or trucks here. If your zoning ordinance was last updated in the 1980s or in the 1990s, there weren't a lot of food carts or food trucks floating around. So I've listed some resources here, and then those are also on our last slide with some hyperlinks. If you do go the route of food carts or food trucks, it's great, and because then not everybody needs to have that investment of bricks and mortar. So it's a great small to medium allowance of somebody jumping. But they're sometimes in zoning, sometimes they're in mobile vendors. There may be other municipal ordinances that are involved. Also, it's something that probably needs some community engagement and talking to local restaurant owners, because if you don't talk to them, usually they'll push back because they feel like it might threaten their market. So that's something where it's worth kind of having a conversation. And also knowing what type of, there are different regulations for those that food carts and food trucks that distribute prepared foods, and those that distribute fresh fruits and vegetables. So one would be regulated by the health department, one would be regulated by Michigan Department of Agriculture. Also, food hubs, as I'm sure some of you work with or interested in, since this has been sponsored by the Michigan Food Hub Learning and Innovation Network. This is the definition from the USDA, but as Rich Frog has often said, you've seen one food hub, you've seen one food hub. And those can be tailored for what's appropriate for different communities or maybe different districts. And this is one of the great things about updating those food uses and food regulations, is then you can, you draft a definition of what it is, and then you decide, okay, where the municipality decide where is it most appropriate. Like a food hub probably won't work in our downtown, but maybe it would work on one of these commercial retail strips that's struggling. And so having that distribution or those multiple uses in one place, would that be, maybe that's a good idea. But if you further define what those uses are and not just keep them in big lumps like processing or or food vending, then you have a better chance of taking these kind of new animals that have been developing in the food world and giving them a place. Because a lot of times the struggle is that people just don't, it's a new use and people don't know what to do with it who are in municipal government. A commercial kitchen is another example, and food incubator kitchens. And these two are variations of the same thing, but a food incubator kitchen, in terms of me looking at it as a planner working for a municipality, that business incubator, that may have a lot more coming and going than a commercial kitchen, which maybe is gonna, they tell us they're gonna have 3 clients or maybe 2. So how that looks and where we put that, there would be some thought to that, and maybe it might be worthwhile defining the 2 differently and breaking them out, and maybe not. Also, one of the innovative tools is to establish a food business district. And this is where something like Eastern Market in Detroit, although there are others across the state, look to co-locate different food businesses. And what that does is foster hubs of activity. You can spur business growth, and there's opportunity for destination or agritourism, but they really need designation and planning. There's a great resource that was developed by the Council of Governments on the west side of the state, the Food Innovation Districts and Economic Gardening Tool, that really goes into this in depth and also has worksheets and in terms of an assessment for whether your community would be ready for this. But this is something to think about in terms of looking to cluster food uses together, just like people across the nation have clustered medical and technological uses together in order to create a critical mass of creative folks that creates economic activity. So I'm going to go real back. Is there any other questions right now about those innovative zoning techniques before we move on to the next section?
I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A pod, so something pops up, I'll let you know. I'll flag it.
Great. All right. So what to do when zoning is not working, because this will happen. So some helpful general hints is, number one, knowing to change zoning takes months, and it could take more than a year. And that's because this is a big decision. Know that if it's in the master plan, zoning changes are much easier. And that's because people have already talked about it. People have already come to an agreement about it. So it's much easier for those municipal leaders to go down a path where folks have said, we want to take this road. Respectful relationships help. You may go in and talk to your municipal planner if you're a food-based business, and then really hate them at the end of the conversation because they did not tell you anything. They did not say yes to anything. Know that they are doing their best, and they have certain rules that they have to abide by. If it's an ordinance, it's a law. It is not a guideline. But the good thing is to know is that in a representative democracy, laws can change. And so that's why the next helpful hint is to ask, what if we do this? What if we go down this point, and then decide what the next steps are? So here's a couple of scenarios that may happen to you. And again, this is written from the point of view of me advising a food-based business. So you've looked on the map, and the site that you know you can buy or know you can rent is red, and what you want to do is processing. So it's the wrong color. I would say my first advice is call your municipality's planning department. Give them the address, describe what you want to do on site, and then ask what approval process is possible. There may be things that if the ordinance is old, things may have been interpreted different ways. Somebody may have made an administrative decision another time. There may have been an amendment that's not online that you didn't see. So give them a call, give them the address, and then ask so what's my best path? A hint is that a lot of municipalities have what's called a planned unit development, or PUD, and you may be available for that. And that's basically where the municipality will flex their rules in return for a bit of community benefit, so something for the community. And they usually have a list of what those are. And so if they say, no, you're not zoned right, and we can't change that because the master plan is this, you could say, okay, is a planned unit development is an option. So when your site is the wrong color, these are some things that may happen. Again, if it's an allowed use due to an interpretation or amendment that's not online, you're good to go. So that's the best news. And if that would be that use by right, you just need a building permit, you can start. You could ask for a use variance. Few municipalities allow for use variances, but some do. So it's worth asking the question. And that's basically where you're asking an appointed body to make an exception to the rules. And they must have a zoning board of appeals or board of zoning appeals by state law. And if they allow use variances and you ask for one, you have to have a hearing. That usually can take 1 to 3 months. Maybe you do need a rezoning. And they said, yeah, we've master planned it for that. Or, well, we haven't, but you could try. And you can apply no matter what. And then they have to give you due process. That rezoning could take 6 to 12 months, and it's going to change the color on the map. It could be also, but no, if they change that color on the site map, they're not just doing it for your use. They're allowing every single use that's allowed in that zone or that color. So another thing you can do is you can say, I would like a conditional rezoning where you can limit the uses or you can sunset uses or put a time limit on it. And that's your choice. The only thing I would advise you if you're looking at that and you're the property owner is that you may be limiting what your property could be sold for in the future. So to think about that, because what municipalities should think about is, okay, what's the next step? Not this owner, but 3 owners from now, what will they do? And I'd advise you as a property owner to keep that same idea in your head. At least if you're going to sell the property at one point in time, what's that next, what are you doing to the person who's selling it down the line? And if you're advised to pursue a PUD, that could be 6 to 12 months. And that's a lot of negotiation. With the rezoning and the PUD, usually you're going to have some investments in terms of what was called soft costs. So you'll have to get plans drawn up. Some of the time, especially if you're going to do a conditional rezoning, you would probably be asked for a site plan, but you should expect that you might have to hire some professionals. What if my use is not listed in the zoning ordinance? I want to have a food hub. There's nothing that fits a food hub. I want to have in my food hub. I want it to have processing. We're gonna have a farmer's market for every 2 days a week, and then we're also going to have a coffee shop that's open every day. That probably doesn't fit in one zone in terms of allowed uses. So call your municipality's planning department, tell them what you want to do on the site, give them the address, ask what the next steps are. One of the hints here is that every zoning ordinance should designate a process for when a use is not listed. And sometimes that's the Board of Zoning Appeals, sometimes it's the Planning Commission, sometimes it's the Township Board. The state law allows folks that just says that they have to have a process, so they have to have a process and it'll vary. So that's worth a question. Again, your options are that due to interpretation or amendment, it's not online, you're good to go. It could be that you have to ask for an interpretation, and then that could take 1 to 3 months. And my advice is to find a use similar to yours at that scale. And if you can find a use similar to yours at that scale within that municipality, that's a good example. Also, you may need a zoning text amendment, and this is what happened with the Washtenaw Food Hub, as I described earlier. What they did is they changed the text of the zoning, and they tailored it a bit to their request. And the municipality may initiate the process, or you may initiate the process. Word of warning, if the municipality initiates the process, you're kind of at their mercy for how long it takes. But then they're doing you a favor by usually they're paying their consultants or their staff to do a lot of the research and whatnot. If you're in a place where you need something done and you need an answer within 6 months, it probably is worthwhile for you to file your own petition and pay the fee to have the zoning text, to have them look at the zoning text amendment. And again, you may be advised to pursue a PUD. When you get to this, there are points where officials hesitate, whether it be the building official, whether it be the municipal planner, whether it be the planning commission, or township board or city council. Please keep in the back of your mind, these are things that they're concerned about. Increased traffic. If there is more traffic coming and going, there's more stress on the roads, and also it's more difficult for people to get around. If it's going to change the character of the area, and that can substantially impact the health, safety, and welfare of folks around that area, or if they perceive it as that, they, that's one of the things that they're going to really look at. For instance, with Washtenaw Food Hub, one of the things that they did not allow that the Food Hub really wanted was to have a coffee shop or a restaurant. And they said, no, this is an agricultural zone. It's not appropriate for people to be coming here every day to get their cup of coffee. They'll be concerned about noise and how much of it, odor, and also your waste disposal, whether it is something that's a byproduct from your process, or whether it's just, especially in agricultural areas, if you're taking over an old farm and maybe the septic system is probably not built for 6 employees there on a daily basis, but it was appropriate for a small family living there, and that's one of the things that you'll be asked about that may seem a little crazy at first, but definitely municipal officials want to know what's happening with your sanitary waste. Also, the other thing is that they're really concerned about public opposition. So that leads to the next point of advice is what you can do is when the public's invited, bring your supporters. I cannot tell you what a difference 5 to 10 people in the room make who are in support of your venture. Also, to give examples with photographs, preferably from Michigan. If it's something new that this municipality has never seen before, again, if you can give them examples, this food hub is happening in Ann Arbor Township, or this food innovation district is over here in Traverse City. They have food trucks in this town that is the next one over. Those sorts of things really go far. And again, if they can be from Michigan or nearby, a lot of times, sometimes the most progressive things with food are from California, but you take an example from California to your local township board, and you may not get that far. So also, I think one of the things that we miss out is in zoning is we still are thinking a lot of times of these separate uses. But if you look at a floor plan of a grocery store, like this one here, which is nicely color coded, it kind of almost looks like a zoning map. They have processing, distribution, and consumption all on site. So your meats, your service meat, and your seafood. If you have a butcher, there'll be some processing. There'll also be a bakery where they're baking cakes or rolls or breads. That's processing. There's distribution, obviously, on a retail basis, and usually that there's consumption somewhere on the site. So if you're looking at a retail corridor and you allow grocery stores, but they won't allow small scale processing, or a small bakery, or some sort of craft food processing, I think that's a legitimate question to take to them and say, okay, well, you allow these things to happen inside these very, very large facilities. Why can't they happen at the smaller level? So, and with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Megan. That was awesome. I guess we'll keep our eye on the Q&A pod and the chat pod for a minute or two here and see if anybody needs any clarification or has any specific questions.
Yeah, I'm looking through the chat. Kurt has some great the sample zoning to consider as a starting point, like sample zoning for agriculture, like in urban agriculture. And to use those as starting points, they're not an endpoint. Those are good places to start and then tailor. That's in terms of what's right for your community.
Sure.
And then from Amanda, Gregory, when she said the Right to Farm Act is to protect existing farmers from new residential individuals moving in and complaining of nuisance. It's not meant to protect new farming. That is completely accurate. And yes, they could come up with a more accurate name, because it's definitely been misinterpreted, to be interpreted to say that everyone in Michigan has a right to farm.
And I'm sure you also saw there was a question on meat processing and why that tends to be relegated to areas far from residential areas. And I think that it's fairly, I think fairly obvious why a lot of folks wouldn't want to live next to a slaughter plant. But it's interesting there. I did post an article there on Black Earth Meats from Wisconsin, and they went through sort of a battle with their community not too long ago and ended up moving for that very reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I think not too long in the past, it wasn't so uncommon to have those sort of activities more closely associated with where people lived, but that's certainly not the case anymore.
No. And sometimes the odor is a big thing, like in terms of not so much microbreweries, but when you get on a larger scale, sometimes those have a very definite odor, which may be problematic in a right next to a residential neighborhood.
Yeah, you'd have to make a lot of sauerkraut or kombucha to become a public nuisance.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not seeing any questions. Maybe we'll give it another minute or two. We do have plenty of time, folks, if you want to chime in. But if nobody does, we can just end a few minutes early. So we'll give it just another minute here, Megan. We just got a comment there, Megan. Just somebody saying very informative and thanks.
Oh, thank you.
So I see some folks dropping off. I think you did such a thorough job that people are just feeling educated, and that's good. So I think we will pull the plug here. I want to say thanks everybody for joining, and thank you for. There's a question.
Rural versus urban zoning, main points of difference. Really, probably the main points of difference are levels of complexity. So rural tends to have an agricultural zone, and that agricultural zone may also function as a large lot residential zone. And then they'll have usually something for manufactured housing, and a little bit of retail and a little bit of industrial. When you look at, and also the main difference is how big those lots are. So rural, the lot sizes are going to be much bigger in terms of agriculture, or in terms of really in terms of everything, because mostly rural, you don't have sewer or water. You don't have sanitary sewer, so the lots need to be big in order for everybody to have septic to deal with waste. And then with urban, things can get a lot more dense in terms of number of people, but also how big the buildings are and what they're used for. So you'll see a lot more variety in cities in terms of uses, and I'll also lots more of the lot sizes, or how big things can be. The lot sizes will be smaller, but the buildings can be much taller. So in terms of food, or looking at it from a food perspective, rural is usually great for food production and whatnot, but and also those associated industries, they'll have some room for associated industries where either crops are aggregated and distributed out, or for tractors and other farm supplies. And then urban's much better. It has a lot more uses for the processing, distribution, retailing, things like that.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, well, I think if that's it, we'll call it good. Just a reminder again for the next Michigan Food Hub Network meeting on July 14th. That will be in Kalamazoo. Information about that meeting will be coming out soon. And also just a reminder that this recording will become available in the next week or two on the Center for Regional Food Systems website. So I encourage you to go there if you missed part of this presentation or would like to share it with somebody else. Thanks again, Megan, for your presentation. That was great. I think folks really found it very informative. So.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And if anybody has any further questions, my contact information was on the slides.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice week. Bye.